Good morning. Welcome again to Glass by Matt. Today I think we're going to do something something I haven't done in a while. We're going to make a little cat figurine, and I think we're going to make it playing with a ball of yarn. So if you're going to be working along with me, you're going to want some clear borosilicate rod. I have 8mm. You use whatever size is convenient for you. And I think today we're also going to make the yarn out of this nice red. This is a translucent red, copper oxide to make it up. There's a variety of hues that you can order from the internet to achieve the color you maybe want. You use whatever color is convenient for you. This is what I have on hand, so this is what I'm going to use. So let's get started. I'm going to start off with a pretty strong neutral flame here. Go ahead and heat up my glass here. And actually, I think for the sake of instruction here, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to crank on the outer burner. Always have a striker on hand. Use a nice big flame here. There we are. This larger flame will heat as you might expect, a larger area of the glass. And it also provides a more consistent heated area to allow you to work the glass a lot more quickly. The one thing you have to be careful though when working with a larger flame such as this is you absolutely must make sure that you do not work your colored glasses too close down here. It's very tempting when you're trying to heat up a larger piece of glass to kind of bring the glass in closer and closer and closer to the source of the flame. The truth of the matter is that won't necessarily provide you with the heat you want. The way this fire works is the actual optimum heating area, or optimal heating area, is right about here. Probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches out. Depending on the size of your flame, that can sometimes be further out, that can sometimes be a little closer in. But you really don't want to be putting your glass right up here against the flame, because one of the other things that happens is you will start to throw heat from your glass, because this is radiating just as much heat as is being thrown at it from the torch. It will start reflecting that heat back at your torch. And if you heat up the tip of the torch too much, well, you can start to have problems. It can start to glow red. Most torches are made to try to avoid this problem, but there's only so much heat that a torch can take when that's both being thrown at it and that it's throwing. So, okay, so we've got a decent gather here. And I'm figuring that this cat's probably going to lie on his back, so maybe I'll gather a little bit more. There's all different sorts of techniques for this. I've seen guys, their primary method is to just rotate the glass as fast as possible and then just kind of feeding into it. I tend to get the whole area really hot and then sort of draw the rods in together and mash them. If you do that though, you absolutely must make sure that you work it in very, very well. Because as the glass is joining together, it forms pockets of air, little bubbles. And in addition, if you're throwing too much heat at it and it starts to devitrify, it will not only ruin the look of your glass, but if air bubbles or pockets get trapped inside of your glass, that will be an area of significant strain. It's also a spot where it's going to cool down faster, and you'll get thermal cracking, which can be the end of your piece. Or, even if it's not the end, you could finish a beautiful piece and then have this one little crack that's running through the body. It's not going to cause the piece to break necessarily, but then it doesn't look very good. Aesthetics are everything. So here we go. This is all nice and worked in. I don't see any air bubbles. Pull it out of the flame a little bit. Let the glass start to settle. Get it working. Get an idea of what shape you want here. Okay. So I think now that we've got this all worked in, I'm going to go ahead and switch off my outer burners. Crank up my gas. Now I prefer to work in an oxidizing flame myself, especially when I'm working with borosilicate. I find that working specific areas of the glass, especially when you're doing figurines, is it's a lot more, well, it's easier for me. But depending on who your instructor is, or if you're teaching yourself, you're going to want to practice this, and you're going to want to figure out what techniques are going to be best for you. Everybody learns differently. There's a sort of, it's funny, there are sets of rules if you go to a school to learn glass blowing that they'll teach you. They prefer the overhand, underhand technique when it comes to working with tubing and rod. But truthfully, if you find you're more comfortable working 2 overhands or 2 underhands, you do what's going to be most comfortable for your hands. You know your hands best, and you can make it work. Okay, so we're going to go ahead now and flatten. I'm going to heat up this whole area back here, and I'm going to mash it down on my paddle. I'm going to heat it up a little more. This is going to serve as the back of my cat, because I'm figuring I'm going to have him lying down on his back with his paws up in the air. Okay. Alright, that seems good enough. I'm going to go ahead and start making the head. And you'll notice, since I mentioned technique, that I tend to switch from both underhand and overhand as I go along. I see benefits in both methods, so as I said, whatever's most comfortable for you. Okay, so we're slowly heating up the glass here. And as we do, I'm going to turn this piece over, and I'm going to start forming my gather basically upside down from the piece. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to allow the glass to gather to where I want the head to be, but I don't want it to flow into the body of my cat. If I let that happen, then I'm going to have to redo the head. I'm going to have to pull the piece out. It's going to take a lot longer. Okay. There, looks like I'm starting to get enough glass gathered for a head. So let's go ahead and let that cool a bit. We'll go ahead and get that separated. And remember that what you're working on at this point is basic forms. Basic forms. You're not going in for the little nitty-gritty details just yet. I'm going to throw a little bit more heat, bring on those outer burners. Remember, as I've said before, and I'll continue to say it, gravity is your friend and your enemy in this process, so you want to use it very, very carefully. The other thing to remember is that glass that you've heated up using this larger burner is going to take a lot longer to cool down, and so it's going to be a lot more susceptible to the forces of gravity. So keep that in mind. What I'm doing here is I'm just touching the glass with my cold stick rod. I haven't heated it up. And that way, as I go along here, I'll be able to pop my stick rod off. Alright, now I'm going to pull this out of the flame. And at a time like this, you want to rotate the glass. There are times when you're making a pendant when you can let it just sit, you can just hold it there. When it's hot and you want it to keep its shape, you want to make sure you're rotating it. You can do it slowly and keep an eye on where the glass is traveling. You can do it quickly, whichever is most comfortable for you. You'll find you'll be able to do that a lot faster as you get more experience with it. Okay, so let's crank off our outer burners. Go a little smaller flame. Now we'll start to do some detail work. Let's heat up the face of this and my rod. just like I did with my horse, with the horses that I make. Trying to gather the glass in the front here to get a basic shape. And what we'll do, that's what we have this paddle for. Just flatten it down and get the shape we want. Now I have convenient little hand paddles available to me if I was going to, which I may end up running over to get. We'll see how this works out. Those are going to be your best friend when it comes to working glass pieces. Now you can do it just as well with this paddle that I've got here on this torch. Sometimes it's handy to have a little something that you can actually move with your hand. Again, whatever is going to be most comfortable for you, try it all. Okay, that seems to be a decent enough look of what I want. So, remember, in basic forming like this, you don't need to worry so much about all those little nitty-gritty details. There are very experienced glass blowers out there, and they will be able to put in all kinds of detail, both color and in clear, in their pieces. And while that's something to look up to, you need to know your limitations. You can get there, okay? Never doubt yourself. You can get there, but it's going to take time. Some of the best glass blowers you've seen out there, if you happen to look at them, they've been doing it for more years than you've probably been alive. Okay. Now what I'm doing here is a dabbing technique. I'm basically heating the rod and touching it down and pulling it up, then getting the rod hot again and touching it down again. And every time I'm mashing it down, I'm putting just a little bit more glass onto the piece. And then when I pull it back up, I'm achieving the shape I want. Then I pull it off and give it a nice blast of heat to work in that glass and create the shape that I'm looking for. And in that way, you can get the ears you're looking for on your cat. Next, I'm going to go back and work this a little better. When you're doing a lot of your pulling, again, you don't want the ear of the cat in the flame. You just want the rod in the flame. That's the real trick there. Okay? And every so often, if you want, just set it down on the ground, get an idea of how it looks. See, I've just done that, and I'm feeling like the neck that I did on this is a little thick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rod here, and I'm going to do a quick little stick. Remember to do that. Heat up your rod, get it nice and hot, pull it out, touch, and I always do a spin here, because if your rod's going to break off, this is where it's going to break off if you didn't stick it right. And now I'm going to carefully, you notice I'm not moving my hands, they're not rotating straight, because the piece isn't straight. The area I'm trying to heat isn't straight. I'm just going to get a little bit of heat right in that neck area. And once it's hot enough, you know, you're not going for soupy hot here. Just enough to start stretching it a little bit. And keep your eyes on this when you do it, because this is the area where you're going to get devitrification, when you're moving the glass and it's not hot enough. So keep your eyes on that. Okay. Right there. Now we'll break that off. Come over to that area where the stick rod was. We'll keep that up. And we'll just pull it right off like that. And don't be afraid to stretch your arm out. Don't worry about that. That's what you got your bucket for. Though I will caution you, those stringers of glass, they can be very, very dangerous because they're very thin, but they are still glass. So they can still get into your pores, or what more often happens to me is they'll get stuck on my jeans, and I'll come home, and all of a sudden I'll find this fiber of glass, and I'm like, how did that get there? Well, they like to adhere to a lot of stuff, so you got to be careful with that. Okay. Now I've got a basic shape on this cat's head, and I'm liking it for the most part. But I'm feeling it's a little big, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat the snout, if you will, up right here. I'm going to go ahead and touch it, and I'm going to slowly pull out. And when you do this, when you're going to pull glass off of your piece, don't heat your rod. You want all the heat to be on the piece of glass that you want to move. See, now that looks a little better. And I'll show you. Okay? Alright, we're going to go ahead and give this a blast, because this is somewhat bigger than other pieces I've done. It's a nice blast of heat. And you don't have to spin your piece quickly in the heat. You really only need to do that if you're finding that parts of your piece are starting to sag. Keep your eyes on it always. Okay. That looks like there's going to be heat. So, next thing we're going to do is we're going to do the arms. Or I should say the front paws. Now make sure you look at your piece and see where it's going to be the most convenient. Now I'm looking at this piece and I'm feeling like part of my torso is a little wider at one part than the other. So that tells me what kind of gather I'm going to need to do in order to make this arm look right. This also helps if, especially when you're beginning, if you're not sure how you want your piece to look, get a picture of a cat, your cat, some neighbor's cat, one from the internet, doing the activity you want that you want your figurine to do. And use that as the basis for your drawing. Okay, that's not terrible. One of the things I had an artistic friend of mine tell me not too long ago is don't worry so much about whether or not your piece looks perfect. Remember that this is artistic glass blowing, all right? We are doing artistic interpretations of reality. If someone wants a glass cat that looks exactly like an actual factual cat, you know what they can do? They can contact one of those figurine making companies. They have machines with computer-made metal molds that have been carved out to look just like cats, and they'll get a nice hot wedge of glass and they'll smack it together between two mold forms, and boom, you'll have your glass cat that looks precisely like an actual cat. If that's the level of detail that you're looking for when you go to purchase a cat or figurine of any nature, that's what you're looking for. That's where you'll find it. You'll find those in Walmart. If you're looking for something that's an artistic interpretation of an animal, handmade, or if you're looking to make one yourself, this is what you're talking about. People are going to love your work all the same, all right? So be confident in what you're doing. Doesn't matter if this is the first time you've ever picked up glass in a torch, or if it's the 100,000th time you've done it. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and redraw this paw. And I say draw because drawing is the process of pulling this glass out. Okay, that's nice. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to heat it up on the rod here, so I want to make sure there's enough on there for a paw. Okay, right there. A little much, so pull some of that off. Okay, that looks like it's on there good. I'm going to heat this back seam here. Make sure it's nice and incorporated, and we'll give it a blast of heat. Okay, now I think one thing that we will do, alright, let's get a slightly longer rod here. And we're going to go ahead and stick this on the back of the head, not on the flat piece. The last thing you want to do is put a stick rod on the part of your piece that's going to be sitting on the ground. And the reason why that's the last thing you want to do, because if you put your stick rod there, then you're not going to be able to make sure the piece is flat. Speaking of which, let's get this back nice and hot. We've been doing a lot of working around here. We want to make sure that's nice and flat. And because we have a stick rod on there, we're going to want to do this gently. Let's give it a little bit more heat. We do not at all want to force this down hard. Okay, that's looking nice and flat. A little less oxygen, a little more heat. There we go. Start rotating our piece. And just like we've done in the past, you want to go ahead and heat that area up and work it in so it's nice and round. Or as round as you can physically make it. Hold it vertically, spin it around, let the glass sag by itself. Alright, that looks good. Turn your piece around. Now, glass blowing is one of those things that there are certainly times when right hand versus left hand dominant can play a factor in how you put together a piece. What I've discovered is that the more you do it, the more ambidextrous you tend to become, to a degree. So whichever hand's the most comfortable or the most accurate for you, you feel when you're drawing. These are the hind legs. So let's go ahead and get the body hot there. I'm going to up my heat a little bit more. the other side hot here. Alright, we'll bring it back down. And we've got all of our legs formed up. Go ahead and blast it. Especially once you've been working down here at this end. You definitely want to work that end, but before you do, make sure you get this upper end hot again. And to reheat it, especially if you've been working. Let's see if I can twist the torch here so you can see it. You want to start here in the outermost part of the flame. There's a lot of heat here, but it's not as strong as with the flames actually slapping against the piece. The faster you work, the less you'll have to do this, but it's always a good thing to do just in case. Be careful of your stick rod. One of the things I did was I tapped it to the back of the cat's head and then I pulled it out a bit in order to give myself a little bit more flexibility with the piece, and so I have to be careful if that doesn't start bending in the heat, because then I'll be in trouble here. Okay, good amount of heat on that. Let's go ahead and bring it down. Now, the tail is one of those things where it can go right the first time or it can go wrong. So we're going to open up the outer burners. We're going to hold the piece out here in the far end of the flame. We want to keep it warm, but we don't really mind, but we don't really want to work it at all. What we want down here in the flame is our stick rod, is our drawing rod that we're going to use to make our tail. And the piece, just keep an eye on it. You don't have to worry about spinning it too much. Just make sure that it's getting some heat across most of its surface. The rod, you want to make sure you're spinning. You want to keep it slightly down, I've found. That way, as the heat causes the glass to become more amorphous, it's gathering up. Okay, that looks good. Now we'll just go ahead and keep this heat on. I'm going to get the tail end, the butt end here hot. Get the tail to join. Okay, and now carefully pull it out. Go slow here. You want to keep your eye on it and make sure that it's drawing out fairly uniformly. For me personally, I think a slightly thicker cat tail will do, so I'm actually going to go back and redraw that. That's the advantage of having all this heat. The more heat I have, the more glass I can regather quickly and redo this. And be careful not to get it too hot, otherwise it's going to start to devitrify. Okay, we'll draw down this time. Keep the rod. Okay. We'll let that gather back up a bit. Alright. Now, we're going to have to work this tail very carefully. We don't want to warp the legs too much, but the tail needs to move in because the piece needs to lie flat. The trick with tails like with a tail, or frankly with a tentacle, or any part of an animal's body that sort of naturally flows or seems to move around in almost any direction, is that you want it to have a very curved surface look. And that means not a lot of heat and manipulation. It's okay to let gravity do the work with that one, because if you're not careful, then it's not going to look right. It'll look forced. It'll look like you made it happen, as opposed to it's sort of happening naturally. Alright? And I'm looking at this, and sight down along it, you know? Look down along it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, oh, it's not all that flat. So I'm going to heat up my rod here. I'm going to go ahead and touch the tail just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and give this whole cat a nice, strong heating in the back. And be careful with this, because this is attached to your tail, and that's part of the area we're heating up. That's an area that can morph and warp, and we don't want that tail to warp or morph. Okay? Pop my rod off, look back down the length. It's looking a little better. Put it back on. Go ahead and hold it up close to your face and get a good look at it. You know? If you see where the spot is, you can sharpen your flame up, localize your heat, and solve that problem. But you want this thing to lie as flat as possible. It's going to look a lot better that way. Go ahead, set it down. If you feel like it's doing that, that's fine. And I think this isn't quite doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a good heating again. And we'll do this all over. And we'll do it again. Okay. Okay. I think that's going to do it. We're probably not going to get it much better than that. And truthfully, if it kind of rolls onto its side, that's alright. That still looks very cat-like. You know, look on the positives here. If it doesn't turn out exactly the way you want it, you can always redo it. Whatever you have time for. Let's tip that out that way. Alright. That looks okay. So let's give this a strong blast. Okay, turn off our outer burners. Now this part's going to be pretty easy. So what we're basically going to do is we're going to go ahead, and actually I'll put on the outer burners again, because I want to keep this thing pretty hot now that it's formed. It's a bigger piece. Bigger pieces are more susceptible to cracking. Go ahead and heat up our red. Due to the strong metal content in most colored rods, they're going to heat up a lot faster than your clear rods, so that's something you have to bear in mind. Also, colored rods tend to not come in as thick a variety as clear rods. You can get clear rods as thin as 1 millimeter and frankly as thick as 30 millimeters, I believe. Some even thicker, perhaps. Obviously, the increased amount of glass that you order, the more likely you are going to have to spend a lot of money on it. Bear that in mind. So we're going to go ahead, and that's a nice ball of red there. I'm going to go ahead and plop that right onto his paw. Separate it. Now I'm going to hold this upside down. I have to be very careful here. And then back side up, because I don't want to warp that paw at all. Press it down on the graphite block if I need to. I want to use the heat. Get the shape I want. Okay. Let's take off the outer burners. Let's go in smaller. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw some string. I'm going to heat up the yarn and the rod. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting in some detail work. So now I'm going to put a little bit of rod on the outside, crisscross it. I'm not going to work it in very well, so I got to make sure my rod's nice and hot. Just kind of give it that look of bean yarn. Now we're going to go ahead and give it a nice uniform heating across here. I want to make sure that everything has an opportunity to at least work in partially. I know I said I wasn't going to work it in, by which I mean that we're not going to do a lot of incredible detail. And I think that's going to do it. So there's our cat and his ball of yarn. We'll go ahead and pop off this stick rod. We'll call that a day. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.